Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be discussing the first chapter of 12th grade Humanities Sociology in the first book, Indian Society, which is the demographic structure of Indian society. And this video is part 1 of a 3-part series, so stay tuned for the other parts as well. This here is the chapter at a glance. We have all the topics that are mentioned in the textbook, which are important to study. So we have what is demography, the types of demography, evolution of demographic studies, importance of demographic studies, theories and concepts, common concepts and indicators, size and growth of Indian population, age structure of Indian population, declining sex ratio, literacy, rural-urban differences, and population policy in India. So obviously there's a lot to cover, but in this part 1 we're only going to be covering these topics, which are what is demography, the types of demography, evolution of demographic studies, the significance or importance of demographic studies, and the 2 main theories that are mentioned in the book. So without any further ado, let's begin. What is demography? The definition is a systematic study of the trends and processes of a population. If we break this definition down, we have a systematic study, which means a study which is based on a well-founded process. So there's a system of the study, it's comprehensive and intensive study of something. Trends means the patterns of change, so whether it be increasing, decreasing, or stabilizing, these patterns are referred to as trends. And the population processes are birth, death, and migration. Essentially, these factors that affect the change in the population, because birth, death, and migration change the size and density of the population. And lastly, we have the population, which means a group of people sharing the same territory. So if we break this complex definition, demography is a study based on a well-founded process of different patterns of change and processes such as birth, death, migration of a group of people sharing the same territory. In the academic language, that would be a systematic study of the trends and processes of a population. There are 2 main types or forms of demography, which are formal and social. Formal demography is a purely quantitative analysis of a population. So it simply numerically measures the population, how many people there are, how many people have been born, how many people have died. It's purely quantitative, which means it's only numerically based. And the methods used in this study, in this form of demography, are usually the census method or the sampling method, and it's done by counting the people. It's purely based on numbers. Whereas the social demography is based on studying the social, cultural, and economic factors that influence a population. So it studies how society is connected, social organization patterns, how the economic factors influence births and deaths and migration, how culture defines population density. All of these factors are studied in social demography. And so this study is more familiar and related to sociology, which also studies society in an empirical or scientific method. It's not purely number based. I guess we could also call it a qualitative study of the population, because it studies external factors that influence the population itself. So in summary, the 2 forms of demography are formal and social. Evolution and demographic studies. So towards the beginning of the 19th century, after the French Revolution, the idea of a nation state was born, where everyone in that territory had a shared history, common descent, and similar ideas of development and a common destiny. So to facilitate this common destiny and collective development, we had to create an interventionist state or a welfare state. In the past, most of the states or the governments were only based on concentrating wealth of the king, the ruler, and the people were essentially just laborers, slaves. They were given no actual benefit, any tangible benefit. Their lives were the least concern of the monarch himself. And everything was done for the glory of the king, who was considered to be a descendant of God himself. So after the French Revolution, where the idea of a monarchy was discarded and a people-centered government was born, an interventionist state was also born, where the welfare of the people and the development of the people and fulfillment of basic needs were the 3 main priorities. So after the creation of an interventionist state, the role of the state increased in formulating policies and implementing these policies towards the welfare of the public. So agriculture, industries, taxation, all of these required separate policies which were designed for the well-being of the public. And so since their role increased, they required data to understand the social organization, to understand how the people worked, what their demands were, how the income was distributed, etc. So they required data on the people, and this data couldn't emerge out of nowhere. It required some study, some collection process. So that's where the birth of demographic studies occurred. Because the state required data on the people, they established a new discipline or a new study to collect this data or to take this data from the people. So this is the importance of demographic studies. We've covered what demography is, the types of demographic studies, and the evolution of demographic studies. So now we're going to understand the significance of this discipline or this study. As I mentioned earlier, it's important for formulating state policies on industry, agriculture, taxation, etc. It's also essential for implementing the state policies, and it provides a strong justification for the existence of social phenomenon. So in the exam, if you receive any question that asks what is the significance of demographic study, this third point is the most essential. It should form the crux of your answer because this is the most linked or correlated to the subject of sociology. Because until this time, people believed that the individual and society were completely distant from each other. They had no correlation whatsoever. But demographic studies, and alongside studies conducted by sociologists such as Emil Durkheim, also revealed that social phenomenon actually exists. The individual and the society are inextricably linked. And this was what we learned in class 11 as well. In the chapter 4 on Western sociologists, Emil Durkheim described what he called as social phenomenon, which is invisible to the eye but forms a collective being. For example, a basketball team. We can't see the unity and integrity between the team members, but the collective feeling exists. Similarly, all social facts and social beings live together and form this social phenomenon, and the individual's actions are relatively more or less defined by what the society does. That's why in Emil Durkheim's study on suicide, he revealed that suicide was not just an individual act, but it was constrained by society. It was essentially caused by society. There were social causes in play. For example, unemployment, or your relationship status, or the economic conditions compelled an individual to commit suicide. It was not all completely psychological. So demographic studies and aggregate statistics revealed that this social phenomenon actually does exist. There are certain invisible, intangible structures and social causes that affect the individual behavior. So this is the most important fact or purpose of demographic study. It provided a strong argument for the existence of social phenomenon. And what social phenomenon is, you may ask? Social phenomenon means social fact, something that's invisible to the individual but constrains his or her actions. Now, moving on to the theories and concepts in demography. The main theories discussed in the curriculum are the Malthusian theory of the Malthusian theory of population growth, and the theory of demographic transition. So we'll begin with the Malthusian theory. So Thomas Robert Malthus was an economist, and in his book, the Essay on the Principle of Population, published in 1789, one of these essays was called an Essay on Population, and he propounded that the population grew at a faster rate than the means of human subsistence, such as food or clothing, and therefore poverty was inevitable. So to understand this, we'll look at a case study. This is all purely hypothetical, just for the sake of your understanding. Suppose in some territory the population consisted of one person, and that one person had 1 kg of wheat. So obviously this 1 kg of wheat could sustain him and he would not be entering poverty. He'd be able to meet his needs and satisfy his wants. Suppose the population increased to 3 people, but the wheat quantity only increased to 2 kgs. Now there'll be increasing difficulty in the division of the resources, and obviously people won't be as satisfied as in the previous case because there's less food and more people. In the next case, the population increased to 9 people, but the wheat quantity only increased to 3 kgs. So the situation is worsening. Next, there's 27 people and only 4 kgs of wheat. So obviously at this point there would be poverty because there's no way that merely 4 kilograms of wheat can sustain a population of 27 people. Poverty, famine, hunger, starvation, and deaths are practically inevitable. So Malthus propounded that the population grows in geometric progression, which means it multiplies 1, 3, 9, 27. It's exponential growth, whereas the arithmetic progression grows in addition, 1 plus 1 2 plus 1 3 plus 1 4. So due to this population growth outstripping the growth of the means of human subsistence, which are just food, clothing, etc., then at some point the resources will not be sufficient enough to meet the needs of the people. So at this point poverty would be unavoidable. So the statement is, since population growth always outstrips the growth of means of subsistence, humanity would be eternally condemned to poverty. However, Malthus also promoted the preventive and positive checks, which were essentially methods or events which would control the population growth from superseding the growth of the means of human subsistence. Preventive checks were under the control of humans, such as postponing marriage and attaining celibacy, which means preventing yourself from entering any relations. But these were only partially successful because the humans couldn't control their natural instincts to a certain degree. This is why Malthus had true belief and faith in the positive checks, which are uncontrollable catastrophic events such as mass spread of disease and famines, which were beyond the control of humans, and they were essentially nature's way of dealing with the extreme population growth and slow growth of the means of subsistence. However, this theory was refuted and proven wrong by the historical experience of Europe and the criticism of Marxist and liberal thinkers. So in the historical experience of Europe post the industrialization period, despite birth rates growing, humans had the capability through technology to control disease. And therefore by controlling the diseases and famines, they were also able to lower the death rates. And they still had a higher birth rate, but this was able to be sustained because industrialization allowed them to produce more goods systematically, and through the application of science and technology, they were able to sustainably produce enough goods to last the entire population. So poverty was therefore effectively controlled through the process of industrialization and factory working. So since Malthus's theory was primarily based on agricultural economy, he failed to consider the industrialization and the impact of that on population growth. This theory also received massive criticism from Marxists and liberals, who stated that poverty is a result of unequal distribution and concentration of wealth, and it's not because of natural causes and population growth. Due to the capitalist system and the forceful class divide between the proletariat and the bourgeois, it caused essentially unequal wealth. It's not because of population growth, it was because of the unequal social distribution of wealth. So therefore this theory was proven wrong. However, it still has great significance as it was one of the earliest population growth theories of the time. The next theory was the theory of demographic transition, which was given by Kingsley Davis, which stated that in contrast to the Malthusian theory of population growth, this theory stated that every society experiences the same economic growth related patterns of population growth, and at one point the population growth stabilizes and poverty can be controlled. So unlike the Malthus theory, population would not be growing forever. It would only grow for a temporary period, and after that it would continue to fall. So therefore population growth was not a major concern. This theory divided the population growth into 3 stages. The first stage resulted in low growth of the population, which is seen in underdeveloped countries. And the reason was because of high birth rates and high death rates. So birth rate refers to the number of births per 1,000 people in the population, and death rate refers to the number of deaths per 1,000 people in the population. So people had more children, but more people also died. So due to the high birth rate and high death rate, the actual growth of the population was pretty low, because growth is the difference between the birth rate and the death rate. If the birth rate and death rate are equal, then there would be minimal growth. And so this is commonly seen in underdeveloped countries, like countries in South America and the African continent, because they're still in the third world country phase. They don't have equal access to resources, they don't have control over disease and famine, they don't have appropriate distribution systems, and so the death rate is high. The death rate is extremely high. But also, in their culture, they're still backward in terms of their culture, so they continue to have high births as well. And this high birth is necessary because of the high deaths. Because if more people are dying than more people are being born, this is a threat to the population itself, because eventually the population would be extinct. It would die off. This is why, to maintain the growth rate, or to maintain the population stability, people have to have enough children to also meet the death rates. The second stage is seen in developing countries like India. This is a stage of high growth rate. It's also referred to a population explosion, because during this second stage, through development of technology and resource development programs, the death rate is able to be controlled, so the death rate decreases. However, birth rate is more of a socio-cultural phenomenon. The number of children a family has is largely determined by what their culture or their traditions or norms prescribe. It can also be seen as a status symbol or a response to the present economic conditions. So birth rates cannot be as easily controlled, and it cannot go down as easily as the death rate. So since the difference between the birth rate and the death rate is extremely high, at this stage the population grows in strides. The magnitude of population growth is extremely high, so this is referred to as a population explosion. Finally, the third stage is seen in developed countries like the United States and China. And at this stage, the birth rate also declines because due to the present economic conditions and changes and progression in the cultural norms and practices, people also have less children, and the death rates continue to be low. So due to low birth rate and low death rate, the difference or the population growth rate is marginal, it's negligible. So that's why this is also a stage of low growth. So every society, regardless of where they are situated in the global map, regardless of their cultures, is prescribed, according to this theory, to have experience the same 3 stages of population growth. And that's why, in comparison to the Malthus theory, the theory of demographic transition prescribes that population growth can be controlled and will be controlled in the future. So it's not a major concern or cause of worry. So, as I mentioned earlier in the video, today we covered what is demography, the types, evolution of demographic studies, the importance of demographic studies, and the 2 main theories of demography, which are Malthusian theory and theory of demographic transition. In the next video, we'll be covering these common concepts and indicators which are very essential for this entire subject: birth rate, death rate, rate of growth, fertility rate, IMR, MMR, sex ratio, age structure, and dependency ratio. We'll also be covering the size and growth of Indian population and the age structure of the Indian population, which includes a comparison of states and a brief discussion on the demographic dividend. So these will all be covered in part 2, so stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and had a great learning experience. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share this video with all your friends, because it provides great motivation to continue to make these videos and produce this content for you guys. So once again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you had a great experience, and until the next one, this is Nisha Tube signing off. Peace.